My father sent out invitations for his 65th birthday party with a strict warning: black tie only. If you cannot dress accordingly, do not come. Then my mother called to explicitly uninvite me, claiming my presence as a single mother would humiliate them in front of my sister's new boyfriend, the son of the city mayor. She told me to stay hidden. I showed up anyway, wearing a custom gown, only to watch the entire room freeze when the mayor himself walked right past. My father dropped to one knee and picked up my 5-year-old daughter. My name is Lauren, and I am 33 years old. I have spent years letting my family believe their false narrative about my life. Before I dive into exactly how that night destroyed their carefully crafted illusions, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family that severely underestimated your worth. The shrill ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet focus of my Friday afternoon. I did not need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. My mother Patricia had a distinct custom ringtone that always seemed to sound like an impending emergency. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and accepted the call. I did not even get the chance to say hello before her voice came through the speaker, sharp and frantic. "Lauren, I saw that you RSVP'd to your father's 65th birthday gala online. I need you to cancel it right now. Go into the system and remove your name." I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, keeping my voice perfectly level. The invitation was sent to my address, Mom. It said family and close friends. "I am your daughter. Why would I cancel?" She let out a harsh, exasperated sigh that vibrated through the phone line. "Do not play dumb with me, Lauren." The invitation clearly stated black tie only. This is not some backyard barbecue where you can show up in one of your wrinkled office blouses or whatever cheap polyester dresses you buy off the clearance rack. This is the most important night of your father's professional life, and we cannot afford any embarrassments. I held the phone away from my ear for a fraction of a second, letting the sheer cruelty of her words wash over me before pulling it back. "By embarrassment, you mean me." I stated, not asking a question, but stating a fact I had known since childhood. She did not even try to deny it. "You are a single mother, Lauren. You work some invisible desk job making pennies, and you are raising Lily all by yourself. We love you, of course we do, but you have to understand the optics here. Brittany is bringing her new boyfriend tonight, and this is the first time he is officially meeting the extended family and your father's business partners." I felt my jaw tighten at the mention of my younger sister Brittany, the golden child. The social media influencer who had never worked a hard day in her 29 years of life yet was constantly showered with praise, attention, and endless funding from our parents. I am raising Lily by myself because I choose to, Mom. Just like I chose to pay my own hospital bills in full the day she was born, while you and Dad were sipping champagne on a yacht in Aspen and refused to answer your phones. "Oh, please, Lauren, do not live in the past," my mother snapped, pivoting effortlessly into her usual gaslighting routine. "We had that trip booked for months, and your labor was entirely unpredictable. Besides, we are talking about tonight. And exactly who is this new boyfriend that requires me to be hidden away like a dirty secret?" I asked, genuinely curious about who could warrant this level of panic from my image-obsessed mother. "His name is Kendrick Harrison," my mother announced, her voice dripping with sudden sickening pride. "He is an incredibly distinguished African-American man, a brilliant urban planner, and more importantly, he is the director of city planning. But that is not even the best part, Lauren. He is the son of Mayor Thomas Harrison. Do you understand now? The mayor's son is dating your sister?" I blinked, staring at the polished mahogany wood of my desk. I knew exactly who Kendrick Harrison was. Everyone in the political sphere of the state knew him. He was smart, pragmatic, and highly respected. I also knew his father very, very well, but I kept my mouth shut, letting my mother continue her frantic explanation. "Your father has been trying to secure the South Bay downtown revitalization contract for his construction firm for over a year," she pressed on, her tone growing increasingly condescending. "This is a multi-million-dollar development deal. If your father gets this contract, it secures our family's legacy. Kendrick being there tonight is our golden ticket. Your father is going to use this opportunity to show Kendrick what a high-class, perfectly put-together family we are. We need to project success, wealth, and a flawless reputation. And a single mother ruins that flawless reputation, I said quietly. She groaned a sound of pure frustration. Lauren, do not make me the villain here. You know how judgmental people can be. If you show up looking tired and stressed, dragging little Lily along in some cheap princess dress, people will ask questions. Kendrick will ask questions. He comes from a powerful, elite political family. They value structure and traditional success. What will he think of your father if he sees that his oldest daughter is a struggling single mom who could not even keep a man around? It reflects poorly on us. We need to look like winners tonight. Just stay home, order a pizza. I will send you a couple of $100 next week to make up for it. The absolute audacity of her offer hung in the air. A couple of $100 to erase my existence. To buy my absence so they could parade my sister around as the ultimate prize. For 33 years I had endured this exact brand of emotional manipulation. I was the scapegoat, the one they projected all their insecurities onto. They needed me to be a failure so they could feel like successes. I did not scream. I did not cry. Years of handling high-stakes political crises had taught me how to compartmentalize panic and rage. Instead, I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. My office. The one located on the top floor of the most expensive commercial building in the city. The headquarters of my own firm, where I operated as the state's leading political strategist and crisis manager, a firm where clients signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements just to sit in my waiting room. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, detached register, I am not going to cancel my RSVP. I am coming to my father's birthday, Lauren. Do not you dare, she shrieked, her facade of maternal concern completely shattering. If you show up and ruin this for your sister, your father will cut you off completely. He will write you out of the will. He will make sure you get nothing. Do you hear me? You stay away from the Ritz-Carlton tonight. I pressed the end call button, cutting off her hysterical threats mid-sentence. I tossed the phone onto my desk and let out a slow, steady breath. The silence of my secure, soundproof office wrapped around me a stark contrast to the chaotic toxicity of my family. They thought I was a broke secretary struggling to pay rent. They thought I was a failure because I drove a safe, unassuming Volvo and dressed in minimalist, unbranded clothing to avoid drawing attention from the press. They had no idea that I preferred the shadows, because the people I managed were always in the glaring spotlight. My eyes drifted from my phone down to the center of my desk. Resting perfectly illuminated under the soft glow of my desk lamp was a thick, leather-bound top-secret contract. It was the final approval document for the exact South Bay revitalization project my father was so desperate to win. But more importantly, my eyes locked onto the signature at the very bottom of the last page. A signature penned in bold blue ink, authorizing me with full veto power over every single bid submitted to the city. The signature belonged to Mayor Thomas Harrison, the man my family was trying so desperately to impress. The man who affectionately called my daughter his little princess. The man whose entire political career I had salvaged from the brink of destruction 4 years ago. I reached out and traced the edge of the crisp paper. My mother wanted black tie. My father wanted to project power. They wanted to use my sister's boyfriend to climb a ladder they did not realize I owned. I picked up my phone again, no longer hesitating. I called the most exclusive boutique in the city to prepare my custom evening gown, then dialed my private assistant. Bring me the complete dossier on my father's construction bids, I instructed calmly. We have a very important play to watch tonight. The time for hiding in the shadows of my family's judgment was over. Tonight they were going to get exactly the kind of high-class, powerful guest they demanded. The phone rang again immediately. Patricia was not someone who accepted being hung up on or ignored. I let the device vibrate against the polished mahogany of my desk for 3 long rings, before finally sliding my finger across the screen. I did not even have to speak. Her voice flooded the quiet space of my office, sharp, frantic, and dripping with venom. Do not you dare hang up on me, Lauren. You have always been this disrespectful, and this is exactly why you ended up in the miserable situation you are in today. A 33-year-old single mother who brought nothing but absolute disgrace to this family. Do you even remember the utter humiliation your father and I endured 5 years ago? Our influential friends asking where our eldest daughter was, while you were entirely alone in some public hospital having a fatherless child. You ruined the perfect image we spent decades building. We had to lie to our entire social circle and say you were doing charity work overseas just to save face and protect your sister Brittany from your scandalous choices. The sheer audacity of her revisionist history was breathtaking. My mother possessed a terrifying gift for twisting reality until it perfectly fit her narrative of perpetual victimhood. She was treating my life like a PR disaster, entirely unaware that I actually managed real PR disasters for a living. Disgrace. I asked, my voice dangerously calm, the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. Is that what you call it, Mom? Because my memory of 5 years ago is remarkably different. I remember being in a delivery room for 22 hours. I remember calling you and Dad terrified because my blood pressure was spiking dangerously high. And I vividly remember the voicemail you left me from your luxury ski resort in Aspen. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch over the secure phone line. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of my next words. You told me it was incredibly selfish of me to go into labor during your annual ski trip. You told me to figure it out because you already paid for your ski passes. So, I did. I figured it out. I paid the $40,000 hospital bill in full with my own money. I drove myself home with my newborn daughter while still recovering. I raised Lily without a single dime or an ounce of help from you or Dad. So do not ever speak to me about disgrace or humiliation. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and I survived. Your superficial image is the only thing you have ever cared about, and I will not be bullied by it anymore. I did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse or launch into another gaslighting tirade. I pressed the red button and immediately blocked her number for the rest of the evening. There were no tears. My eyes were completely dry. The desperate, anxious young woman, who used to cry herself to sleep wishing for her parents' approval, had died in that delivery room 5 years ago. The woman who replaced her was a ruthless crisis manager who orchestrated statewide political campaigns and handled multi-million-dollar corporate scandals before her morning coffee. Tears were a useless metric of pain. Action, strategy, and leverage were the only currencies that mattered in my world now. I picked up my secure desk phone and dialed a private number. It rang only once before a crisp, highly professional voice answered. Antonio's atelier. How may I assist you today, Antonio? It is Lauren, I said, my voice instantly returning to its usual authoritative cadence. I need the black silk gown we discussed last month. The bespoke piece with the asymmetrical neckline and the tailored silhouette. I will be wearing it tonight. Of course, Lauren, Antonio replied smoothly, already anticipating my needs. It is perfectly tailored and ready. I will have it couriered directly to your penthouse within the hour. Will you require the diamond accessories we sourced from Milan? No diamonds, I instructed firmly. Keep it strictly quiet luxury. No flashy logos, no overt displays of wealth, and absolutely nothing that sparkles unnecessarily. I want the fabric and the precision of the cut to do the talking. My family prefers loud, cheap displays of money to prove their worth. I prefer absolute power. Consider it done. It will be an impeccable statement, he assured me before ending the call. I glanced at the framed photograph sitting on the corner of my desk. It was Lily with her bright, intelligent eyes and gap-toothed smile proudly holding a finger painting she had made for me. She was my entire world, my reason for building this empire. My parents viewed her as a mistake, a blemish on their pristine social record that needed to be hidden away. They had absolutely no idea that Lily was adored by the most powerful people in the state, including the mayor himself, who insisted on keeping her messy crayon drawings displayed on his own refrigerator in the mayoral mansion. I left my office, bypassed the private elevator, and drove my unassuming Volvo back to my downtown penthouse. It was a sprawling property I owned completely in cash under a blind trust, a sanctuary high above the city skyline. When I walked through the heavy oak door, Lily was sitting on the thick living room rug, building an elaborate tower out of wooden blocks. My nanny, a wonderful and discreet older woman named Clara, smiled warmly as I walked in. Mommy Lily dropped her wooden blocks and ran straight to my legs, wrapping her small arms tightly around my knees. "Hello, my sweet girl," I said, crouching down to kiss her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "We are going to a very big party tonight. It is your grandpa's birthday." Lily tilted her head, her dark curls bouncing as she looked at me with genuine confusion. The grandpa who never visits us children possessed a brutal, unfiltered honesty that adults spent their entire lives trying to unlearn. "Yes, that grandpa," I replied gently, smoothing her hair. "But we are going to make it a very special night. I need you to go to your closet and pick out your absolute favorite dress, the big fluffy princess one with the ribbon." Lily gasped in pure delight and sprinted toward her bedroom, her previous question completely forgotten in the face of wearing her best dress. I stood up, my posture straightening as the strategist in me took over. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed my lead intelligence operative and senior assistant, David. He was the best in the business, a man who could uncover a corrupt politician's buried financial secrets in under an hour. He was the hidden blade in my political arsenal. "David," I said as soon as the line connected, "I need you to pull the complete physical dossier for the South Bay Revitalization Project. Every single bid, every safety violation record tied to my father's firm, and the final veto contract." "The hard copies?" David asked, sounding slightly surprised but already typing rapidly on his keyboard. "I thought you finalized that digital brief for the mayor this morning." "I did," I replied, a cold, calculated smile finally touching my lips. "But I need the physical file delivered to me tonight at the Ritz-Carlton. Bring me the South Bay project file. Tonight we have a play to watch." The drive to the Ritz-Carlton took exactly 24 minutes, a route I navigated with practiced precision in my silver Volvo SUV. To the outside observer, and especially to my family, the vehicle was the ultimate symbol of my mundane middle-class existence. They saw a tired single mother driving the safest, most boring car on the market because she could not afford a sleek European sports car like my sister Brittany. They had no idea the Volvo was heavily armored, fitted with bullet-resistant glass, and leased under a corporate shell company for security purposes. When you manage the deepest, darkest political crises for the state's most powerful figures, you do not drive a vehicle that draws attention. You blend in. You become invisible so you can pull the strings without anyone noticing the puppeteer. Lily sat securely in her car seat in the back, happily humming a song she learned at preschool, completely oblivious to the impending storm. She wore a beautiful midnight blue velvet dress, perfectly complementing my own dark silk gown, with a small silver ribbon tied in her dark curls. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror and felt a fierce, unapologetic surge of protective instinct. My parents had spent 5 long years pretending she did not exist. They treated my brilliant, beautiful daughter like an unfortunate mistake that tainted their perfect suburban country club aesthetic. Tonight they were going to learn exactly how much power this supposedly ruined daughter wielded. We stopped at a red light 2 blocks away from the opulent hotel, and my phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. I picked it up, glancing at the encrypted messaging app I used exclusively for high-level government communications. The text was from the chief of staff at the mayor's office. "The Eagle is landing at 8:15. He is looking forward to seeing you and the little one." I typed a quick, brief acknowledgement and locked the screen, letting the device drop back into my designer clutch. My family genuinely believed I pushed papers in a dreary cubicle, making barely enough to cover rent and groceries in a bad neighborhood. Richard and Patricia loved to tell their affluent friends that I was a lower-level administrative assistant, a pathetic lie they concocted to excuse my absence from their lavish social events. It was easier for them to invent a mediocre career for me than to admit they had zero idea what I actually did for a living. They were so blinded by their own superficial metrics of success that they never bothered to look beneath the surface. They did not know that 4 years ago, when Thomas Harrison was just a struggling candidate embroiled in a vicious smear campaign that nearly ended his political career, I was the one who pulled him out of the fire. I orchestrated the aggressive counter-narrative, dismantled his opponents with surgical precision, and secured his landslide victory. I did not just work for the mayor. I built his political throne. He trusted my strategic vision, implicitly relying on my counsel for every major legislative move, to the point where no major city contract was awarded without my final rigorous review. And tonight, my father was banking his entire construction empire's future on a massive urban development project that I had already evaluated, scrutinized, and quietly slated for absolute rejection. He thought bringing Kendrick Harrison into the family fold via Brittany would secure his corrupt bid. He did not realize the woman holding the ultimate veto power was the very daughter he had just banned from his party. The towering facade of the Ritz-Carlton loomed ahead, its massive crystal chandeliers casting a warm golden glow onto the bustling street. Valets in crisp uniforms were rushing to open doors for the city's elite, ushering them into my father's lavish 65th birthday celebration. The line of luxury vehicles stretching down the block was a testament to his desperate need for validation. He invited everyone who was anyone, hoping to create an illusion of absolute power and immense wealth to impress his future son-in-law. I pulled the armored Volvo up to the valet stand. The attendant looked momentarily surprised by the modest vehicle among a sea of imported exotics, but his professional demeanor quickly returned. He opened my door, and I stepped out into the crisp evening air. The night breeze caught the edge of my bespoke silk gown, the fabric flowing with an elegant, understated power. There were no flashy labels, no ostentatious jewels, just the terrifying confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. I walked around to the back seat, unbuckled Lily, and gently set her on her feet, smoothing down her velvet skirt. As I took my daughter's small hand in mine, a group of local press photographers stationed near the red carpet entrance turned their lenses toward the arriving guests. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding sequence, capturing the moment. I did not flinch or look away. I lifted my chin, tightened my grip on Lily's hand, and walked straight toward the grand entrance. The battle had officially begun. The heavy glass doors of the Ritz-Carlton glided open, welcoming us into a cavernous lobby dripping with excess. A massive crystal chandelier dominated the ceiling, throwing fractured light across the polished marble floors. The air smelled of expensive lilies and the subtle, sharp scent of old money. Waiters carrying silver trays of champagne wove through clusters of guests dressed in their finest rented tuxedos and logo-heavy gowns. I kept my grip firm but gentle on Lily's small hand, letting her gaze in wonder at the sparkling lights above. We barely made it past the initial coat check before the barricade materialized. My parents moved with a frantic, uncoordinated speed that completely betrayed their carefully curated aura of upper-class sophistication. My father, Richard, practically lunged across the patterned carpet, his face already flushing a dangerous shade of crimson above the stiff collar of his tuxedo. My mother, Patricia, trailed half a step behind him, her eyes darting wildly around the lobby to see if any of their high-profile guests had witnessed my arrival. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" Richard hissed, stopping dead in front of me to block my path. He kept his voice low, a harsh, vibrating whisper meant to intimidate me without causing a public scene. I smiled, keeping my expression perfectly serene. "Good evening, Dad. Happy birthday." "Do not play games with me, Lauren," he growled, stepping so close I could smell the strong, pungent cologne he always wore to mask his nervous sweat. "Your mother explicitly told you to stay away." We made it abundantly clear that this event was strictly for family and associates who understand how to present themselves. You have no business being here. You are going to ruin everything I have built. Patricia stepped up beside him, her manicured fingers clutching her heavily branded designer clutch like a shield. Lauren, please, she begged, though her tone held zero affection. You are embarrassing us. Look at you. You brought the child. And look at what you are wearing. Richard's gaze swept over my gown with undisguised disgust. I had anticipated his reaction, but his utter lack of refinement still amused me. He was a man who believed wealth had to be shouted from the rooftops. If a garment did not have a massive, recognizable logo slapped across the chest, he considered it garbage. He had absolutely no capacity to recognize the flawless drape of bespoke Italian silk, or the hundreds of hours of masterful hand-stitching that went into my dress. What is this cheap black rag you have wrapped around yourself? Richard sneered, his lip curling in contempt. You could not even bother to rent something decent for one night. You had to show up looking like you are attending a funeral in a discount store outfit. This is a black tie gala for the city's elite, not a soup kitchen line. You look like a beggar, Lauren. I let his insults slide off me like water. Actually, Dad, true luxury does not need to scream for attention. But I would not expect a man who builds strip malls to understand the nuances of quiet elegance. His face turned a deeper shade of purple. You ungrateful brat, you think you can walk in here and insult me at my own birthday party? You are a lowly secretary. You can barely afford to feed that kid of yours, let alone understand luxury. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at Lily, who immediately hid behind my legs, sensing his hostility. I shifted my stance, placing myself entirely between my father and my daughter. My calm demeanor hardened into something sharp and unyielding. Do not point at her, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a deadly authority that made Patricia flinch. You do not get to dictate terms to me, Richard spat back completely, ignoring my warning. You have always been a massive disappointment. We are hosting the mayor's son tonight. Kendrick Harrison is inside right now with your sister. Do you comprehend what is at stake? I am securing a city contract that will make this family untouchable. I am not letting my failure of a daughter drag her messy, pathetic life into my shining moment and scare off my future son-in-law. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, trying to pull him back slightly. Richard, keep your voice down. The Hendersons are walking by. She turned her panicked eyes back to me. Lauren, I will write you a check right now. Just turn around, get back in your little car, and go home. Do not ruin your sister's night. Brittany deserves this. She has worked so hard to cultivate this relationship with Kendrick. Worked hard? I asked smoothly. You mean she managed to successfully memorize his favorite cocktail order while shopping on your credit cards? That is enough. Richard commanded, his patience entirely exhausted. You are leaving. Right now. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors, I will make sure you never see a single dime of inheritance. I will cut you out of my will completely, Lauren. I stared directly into his furious eyes. Keep your money, Dad. I do not need it, and I certainly do not want it. I was invited and I am going inside. I took a step forward, intending to bypass them, but Richard physically blocked my path again, stepping heavily into my personal space. His eyes narrowed entirely, devoid of any paternal warmth. You leave me no choice, he declared, his voice dripping with malice. You want to act like trash, I will have you thrown out like trash. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers sharply in the air, gesturing toward the main security podium. Two large, broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits immediately noticed the signal. They adjusted their earpieces and began striding purposefully across the marble floor, their eyes locked directly on me and Lily. They moved with the aggressive, unhesitating momentum of men trained to swiftly remove unwanted elements from high society gatherings. Take them out through the service exit, Richard commanded the approaching guards, a triumphant, cruel smirk twisting his face. These two are trespassing. Before the guards could even reach out to grab my arms, Patricia stepped forward, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of maternal distress. She knew exactly what she was doing. My mother possessed an uncanny ability to read a room and manipulate the audience, and the Ritz-Carlton lobby was currently packed with the exact demographic she catered to. She raised her voice, ensuring the pitch was perfectly calibrated to carry over the ambient chatter of the surrounding socialites without sounding like an outright scream. "Lauren, please do not do this to us again," Patricia cried out, her face contorting into a mask of pure fabricated agony. "I know you are struggling to make rent this month, but coming here to extort your father at his own birthday gala is a new low even for you." The effect was instantaneous. The elegant hum of the lobby ground to a sudden halt. Heads turned in our direction. Women adorned in expensive jewels paused with champagne flutes halfway to their lips. Men in tailored tuxedos leaned in their eyes, darting between my father's red face and my seemingly modest presence. The whispers began immediately buzzing through the crowd like a swarm of angry bees. Words like extortion, estranged daughter, and desperate floated through the air, completely manufactured by Patricia's single sentence. She was painting me as the tragic, money-hungry failure of the family, a desperate single mother willing to ruin a milestone celebration just to get a handout. It was a masterful stroke of character assassination designed entirely to protect Brittany and impress the powerful political family they were so desperate to court. Lily felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The heavy judging stares of the wealthy onlookers frightened her. She whimpered softly, pressing her small face deep into the folds of my dark silk dress, her tiny hands clutching the fabric in absolute terror. I rested my hand gently on the back of her head, soothing her with a rhythmic, comforting motion. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my spine made of steel. I refused to give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "We have given you chance after chance to turn your life around," Patricia continued, stepping closer to play the part of the long-suffering savior. "We offered to help you go back to school, but you chose this path. You chose to be difficult, and now you drag an innocent child into this high-class venue to make a scene. Have you no shame?" With a swift, practiced motion, Patricia snapped open her heavily branded designer clutch. She pulled out a small, crisp slip of paper. It was a pre-written check. She thrust it aggressively toward my chest, practically forcing it into my hand. "Here is $500, she declared, ensuring the amount echoed clearly for the guests standing nearby to hear. "Take the child and go get some burgers and fries. Just leave us in peace. Brittany is inside with Kendrick Harrison right now, and she does not need her special evening ruined by your toxic behavior. Now take the money and leave." I looked down at the slip of paper resting in my palm. $500. That was the exact price tag they placed on my dignity. That was what they thought it cost to make me disappear into the night and preserve their hollow, pathetic illusion of a perfect family. The crowd watched with bated breath, fully expecting me to burst into tears, snatch the money, and run out the revolving glass doors in shame. My father stood behind Patricia, a victorious, cruel smile stretching across his face, absolutely certain that his wife's public humiliation had finally broken me. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply looked up from the check and locked eyes with my mother. The sheer freezing void in my gaze actually made her take a sudden, involuntary step backward. Slowly, deliberately, I pinched the top edge of the check with my thumb and index finger. The entire lobby fell dead silent as I ripped the thick bank paper straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet room. I placed the two halves together and ripped them again. And then again. I opened my hand, letting the shredded, worthless pieces of their bribe flutter down to the polished marble floor, landing directly on the tips of Patricia's expensive designer heels. "I do not need your charity, Patricia," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, authoritative resonance that cut through the lobby like a blade. "And I certainly do not eat fast food. If you want to put on a theatrical performance to impress your shallow friends, you will have to find another actress. I am not playing your victim tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Some guests actively stepped back, shocked by the sheer defiance radiating from the woman they had just assumed was a desperate beggar. Richard's face morphed from arrogant triumph into absolute unhinged fury. He realized the public shaming tactic had failed completely. The whispers in the crowd were no longer about the desperate daughter, but about the aggressive, controlling parents whose bribe had just been torn to shreds. "Take her out!" Richard roared, completely losing his composure. He gestured violently at the two security guards who had been waiting for the signal. "Do not just stand there. Grab her arms and throw her onto the street right now." The muscular guards lunged forward, their hands reaching out to grab my shoulders. I did not retreat. I held Lily's hand tighter, my eyes locked on the men ready to unleash a legal firestorm the second they made physical contact. But before their fingers could even brush the fabric of my gown, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop exactly where you are!" The guards froze instantly, their hands hovering just inches from me. The crowd parted as a tall, impeccably dressed man strode rapidly across the marble floor. It was the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton, his silver name tag gleaming under the chandeliers. He was accompanied by two senior concierges, his expression tight with urgency. Richard let out a booming laugh of sheer vindication. "Ah, the management. Perfect timing," he declared, turning to face the approaching executive with a smug, entitled grin. "I am Richard, the host of the Diamond Ballroom event tonight. I demand that you have this woman and her child removed from your premises immediately. They are trespassing, causing a public disturbance and harassing your paying guests. Get them out of my sight." The general manager did not even glance at my father. He walked straight past Richard's outstretched, demanding hand as if the man were completely invisible. The two senior concierges mirrored his movements, their eyes fixed firmly on me. Richard opened his mouth to bark another order, but the words died in his throat when the general manager abruptly stopped 2 feet in front of me and lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow. "Good evening, ma'am. It is an absolute honor to welcome you back to the Ritz-Carlton," the manager said, his voice carrying a tone of utmost reverence that echoed through the stunned lobby. "We were informed of your potential arrival by the mayor's office. Please accept my deepest apologies for this unacceptable disturbance." I maintained my composed posture, offering a slight gracious nod. I calmly opened my clutch. I bypassed the standard identification cards and pulled out a heavy, matte black metal card. It was not a credit card. It was the Platinum Sovereign Key. This specific piece of metal was an exclusive credential issued only to elite political figures, high-ranking diplomats, and the hotel's absolute highest tier of executive partners. It granted the bearer unrestricted access to any area, any VIP suite, and any service the hotel could possibly provide entirely off the books and fully comped by the city's elite hospitality consortium. I held the black metal card between my index and middle fingers, letting the overhead chandelier light catch the embossed silver crest of the city's political office. "I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding regarding my guest status tonight," I said smoothly, my voice projecting crisp authority. The general manager took one look at the heavy metal card, and his face paled slightly, recognizing the sheer level of power it represented. He immediately swiveled around to face the two burly security guards who were still hovering awkwardly near my elbows. "Step back immediately," the manager ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. "You will not touch this woman. You will not even breathe in her direction. Clear the path." The guards retreated instantly, their aggressive postures dissolving into submissive apologies as they melted back into the shadows of the lobby. Richard and Patricia stood frozen, their mouths slightly parted in utter disbelief. My father's face transitioned from a violent flushed red to a sickly pale white. He stared at the black metal card in my hand, his mind desperately trying to calculate how his supposedly impoverished daughter possessed an item that commanded the general manager of a 5-star hotel to bow. He knew enough about wealth to recognize true power when he saw it, but his massive ego refused to let him accept that the power belonged to me. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping its booming arrogance and taking on a confused defensive edge. "She is a secretary. She cannot possibly hold a VIP membership here. You are making a massive mistake. Check her credentials again." The general manager finally turned to look at my father, his expression turning decidedly icy. "Sir, I would highly advise you to lower your voice. This woman is a highly protected guest of our establishment. If you continue to harass her, I will be forced to revoke your ballroom reservation and ask you to leave your own event." Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. "You cannot do that. We paid thousands for that room. We have city officials arriving. Then I suggest you conduct yourselves with the decorum expected of our patrons," the manager replied sharply. He turned his attention back to me, his harsh demeanor melting instantly back into subservient warmth. "Please, Mom, allow me to personally escort you and the little miss into the Diamond Ballroom. We have secured a prime table for you exactly as requested by your office." "Thank you," I replied. "That would be lovely." I gently squeezed Lily's hand. She looked up at the tall general manager, her previous fear replaced by curious wonder. She gave him a small bright smile, and the rigid executive actually smiled back, completely charmed by my daughter. We began our walk down the grand corridor leading toward the main event space. The general manager walked half a step ahead, clearing the path of any lingering guests, treating me with the level of deference usually reserved for visiting royalty. The heavy gold-leafed double doors of the Diamond Ballroom loomed ahead, guarded by event staff, who quickly pulled them open at the manager's approach. I could hear the frantic, heavy footsteps of my parents hurrying behind me. They were scrambling to keep up their perfectly curated public image, completely shattered by the bizarre reality unfolding in front of them. The loud, vibrant jazz music from the ballroom spilled out into the hallway as we crossed the threshold into the spectacular party my father had funded. Just as I stepped onto the plush carpet of the venue, I felt a hot, angry breath against my ear. Richard had managed to close the distance, leaning in close, so only I could hear his venomous whisper over the sound of the live band. "I do not know what kind of dirty trick you are using, Lauren," he growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You must have slept with someone or forged that card to get in here. But do not think you have won anything. Just wait until Brittany and Kendrick get here. When the mayor's son sees what a pathetic fraud you are, I am going to expose you in front of everyone. I will teach you a lesson you will never forget." I did not break my stride. I did not turn my head to acknowledge his pathetic threat. I simply kept my eyes forward, stepping into the brilliant light of the ballroom, ready to let him dig his own grave. The Diamond Ballroom was a masterclass in excessive spending. Massive floral arrangements towered over tables draped in heavy silver linens. A 12-piece jazz band played enthusiastically on a raised mahogany stage. I sat at a prime table near the center of the room, a location the general manager had personally secured for me. Lily was happily occupied with a small plate of artisan macarons, completely unfazed by the hostile glares burning into the back of my head from across the room. Richard and Patricia were stationed near the entrance, their smiles tight and nervous, waiting for their ultimate prize to arrive. I observed them with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying a particularly predictable species of insect. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open wider, and a visible ripple of energy surged through the gathered crowd. The collective attention of the room shifted entirely toward the entrance. My parents instantly stood taller, their faces transforming into masks of pure, desperate joy. My younger sister Brittany had arrived. She made her entrance with the calculated, overly dramatic flair of someone who believed the entire world revolved around her social media feed. She was draped in a skin-tight floor-length gown, entirely covered in jagged silver rhinestones. The dress caught the light of the chandeliers and reflected it back in a blinding, aggressive display of cheap glamour. It was loud, it was desperate, and it was exactly the kind of superficial garment my father considered the height of high fashion. Brittany paused at the threshold, soaking in the stares of the local socialites, her chin tilted upward in a practiced pose of superiority. But the real reason for the shifting atmosphere in the room was the man standing beside her, holding her arm with a rigid, polite posture. Kendrick Harrison commanded the space without even trying. He was a striking African-American man in his early 30s, dressed in a masterfully tailored midnight blue tuxedo that spoke of old money and quiet confidence. As the director of city planning and the son of Mayor Thomas Harrison, Kendrick possessed a natural, dignified authority. His sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the ballroom, taking in the ostentatious decorations with a subtle, almost imperceptible tightness in his jaw. He was a pragmatic, brilliant urban planner who spent his days analyzing infrastructure and city budgets. He clearly looked out of place amidst this gaudy, desperate display of newly acquired wealth. The contrast between the two of them was jarring. Brittany clung to his arm like an accessory she wanted to flaunt to her rivals, while Kendrick carried himself with the poised restraint of a man fulfilling a tedious social obligation. Richard and Patricia practically tripped over themselves, rushing forward to greet him. I watched from my table as my father aggressively pumped Kendrick's hand, his mouth moving a mile a minute in what was undoubtedly a sickeningly sweet display of flattery. Patricia was touching Brittany's hair, beaming with a level of pride she had never once directed toward me. Then Brittany's eyes swept across the ballroom floor and locked directly onto me. I did not look away. I held her gaze with absolute chilling calm. I saw the immediate flash of confusion on her face, quickly replaced by a dark, malicious glee. The golden child had spotted her favorite target. For her entire life, Brittany had used my supposed failures as a stepping stone to elevate her own status. Whenever she felt inadequate, she simply looked at the narrative our parents had written for me and felt superior again. Seeing me sitting at a prime table, unbothered and serene, was a direct challenge to her fragile ego. She whispered something to Kendrick and began marching across the ballroom floor. She did not take the time to introduce him to my father's wealthy associates or the local politicians scattered around the room. Her sole focus was dragging her powerful new boyfriend straight over to my table to execute a public humiliation. She wanted to show Kendrick how far above me she was, using my presence to highlight her own glittering success. Richard and Patricia trailed close behind them, their faces a mixture of panic and eager anticipation. They were terrified I might say something to ruin the evening, but they were also desperate to see Brittany put me back in my designated place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Brittany arrived at my table, bringing with her an overwhelming cloud of sweet, heavy perfume. She stood over me, her hands resting on her hips, her rhinestone dress glittering aggressively in my peripheral vision. She looked down at me, then cast a look of utter disgust at Lily, who was busy wiping a crumb of macaron from her cheek. Kendrick stood quietly beside her. He maintained his composed, professional demeanor, though I could see a flicker of fatigue in his eyes. He was waiting for the introduction, likely expecting to meet another one of my father's loud, superficial business partners. Instead, Brittany turned to him with a sugary, venomous smile. "Kendrick, baby, I want you to meet someone," Brittany announced, her voice pitched perfectly, so the surrounding tables could hear every single word. "This is my older sister, Lauren. She is the family disappointment I was telling you about earlier. The one who dropped out of everything to become a struggling single mother." She let out a high melodic laugh that sounded like shattering glass. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of raw contempt, as they took in the flawless lines of my bespoke black silk gown. "I honestly cannot believe the security staff even let her pass the lobby," Brittany continued, leaning closer to Kendrick while keeping her eyes fixed on me. "She works some pathetic desk job for minimum wage. She probably had to take out a high-interest payday loan just to rent that black dress for the night." "Do not stand too close, baby. Desperation is highly contagious." The insult hung in the air, thick and toxic. My father let out a low, approving chuckle from a few feet away. My mother crossed her arms, looking down her nose at me, fully expecting me to shrink into my seat, burst into tears, and flee the ballroom in absolute shame. They wanted me broken. They needed me destroyed so their illusion of superiority could remain intact. I did not break. I did not even blink. I sat comfortably in my chair, the heavy silk of my dress pooling elegantly around me. I reached out with a steady, perfectly manicured hand and picked up my crystal glass of ice water. I brought the rim to my lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. I let the cold water slide down my throat, savoring the absolute silence of my own reaction. Then I lowered the glass, looked directly into Brittany's eyes, and let a slow, terrifying smirk touch the corners of my mouth. The smirk on my face did not waver. I let the silence stretch, allowing the sheer weight of Brittany's childish insult to hang in the air until it became uncomfortable for everyone except me. I did not look at my sister. My gaze shifted directly to Kendrick Harrison. I watched the subtle, microscopic changes in his expression. Kendrick was not just a politician's son riding on his father's coattails. He was a highly educated, fiercely intelligent urban planner who spent his days dissecting complex infrastructure proposals and reading the hidden motives of cutthroat real estate developers. He made a living out of seeing through the noise. And right now, as he looked at me, he was seeing through Brittany's entire fabricated narrative. He took in my relaxed posture. He noted the way I held my crystal water glass with absolute, unwavering stability. A desperate, humiliated woman would be shrinking into her seat, avoiding eye contact, perhaps trembling or fighting back tears. I was doing none of those things. I was sitting there with the relaxed, predatory stillness of someone holding a royal flush. His sharp eyes swept over my dress. Unlike my father, Kendrick possessed genuine refinement. He did not need a glaring logo to recognize extreme wealth. He saw the immaculate hand-stitched seams of my silk gown, the perfect architectural drape of the fabric that could only come from a master tailor, and the absolute absence of trying too hard. Then he looked at little Lily, who was happily swinging her legs under the table, wearing a velvet dress that cost more than my sister's entire rhinestone ensemble. Kendrick was putting the puzzle pieces together, and the picture he was getting completely contradicted the pathetic, destitute sister Brittany had spent months describing to him. With the polite, ingrained manners of a man raised in high society, Kendrick gently disengaged his arm from Brittany's tight, possessive grip. He took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. He extended a firm, steady hand across the table. "It is a genuine pleasure to meet you, Lauren," Kendrick said, his voice a rich, resonant baritone that carried a distinctly professional courtesy. "I am Kendrick. Your sister has mentioned you, though. I must say you do not match the description at all." I appreciated his sharp intuition. I reached out to accept his handshake, ready to offer a perfectly diplomatic greeting that would further highlight my sister's utter lack of class. But before my fingers could even brush against his, Brittany let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She lunged forward and physically yanked Kendrick's arm back, pulling him away from the table with a harsh, ungraceful jerk. "Kendrick, do not." Brittany practically shrieked, her voice pitching up in genuine panic and disgust. "Do not touch her. I told you she is an absolute mess. You do not know where she has been or what kind of people she associates with. We do not engage with her kind of negativity." Kendrick stumbled back half a step, completely caught off guard by his girlfriend's sudden aggressive physical intervention. He looked at his arm still clutched in Brittany's manicured claws, and a deep, unmistakable furrow formed between his brows. Before Kendrick could process the sheer disrespect of that moment, a chaotic flurry of movement descended upon us. Richard and Patricia, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, saw Kendrick attempting to show me basic human decency and immediately launched into panic mode. They swarmed the table like a pair of desperate vultures, physically positioning their bodies to block me from Kendrick's line of sight. "Oh, Kendrick, please forgive this incredibly awkward situation," Patricia gushed, her voice pitched artificially high, as she forcefully wedged herself between me and the director of city planning. "We are so embarrassed. We specifically asked the security team to keep the riffraff out, but unfortunately, some people have absolutely zero shame when it comes to crashing private events." Richard aggressively clapped a heavy hand onto Kendrick's shoulder, attempting to steer him away from my table and toward the center of the room. "Let us not waste another second of this beautiful evening dwelling on the family failures," Richard boomed with false hearty cheer. Tonight is about celebrating success. It is about celebrating my brilliant, beautiful daughter Brittany and the incredible man she brought home. I sat back in my chair watching the spectacle unfold with clinical fascination. They were trying so hard to bury me under their avalanche of fake charm, entirely blind to how unhinged they looked to an outside observer. You know, Kendrick? My father continued, his voice dripping with sycophantic desperation. Brittany has the biggest heart in the world. She actually tolerates her sister's toxic presence because she is just so deeply charitable. She volunteers, she hosts charity galas, she is the absolute light of this family, not like the dark cloud sitting over there. We try to keep Lauren away from civilized company for everyone's safety. Patricia nodded vigorously, chiming in to reinforce the smear campaign. It is a tragedy, really. We gave Lauren every opportunity, but she chose to be a rebellious, ungrateful burden. We pour all our love into Brittany now because she actually appreciates it. She is practically a saint for even acknowledging her sister's existence tonight. They were laying it on incredibly thick, painting Brittany as a flawless angel and me as a wretched demon. They thought they were securing Kendrick's admiration by highlighting my supposed flaws. They believed that by stepping on my neck they could elevate Brittany to a pedestal worthy of a mayoral family. But they were severely underestimating the man they were trying to impress. I watched Kendrick's reaction closely. He was no longer smiling. The polite political mask he had worn upon entering the ballroom was completely gone. His jaw was locked tight, and the muscles in his neck were tense. He looked at Richard's hand gripping his shoulder, then looked at Patricia's overly eager, desperate face, and finally he looked at Brittany, who was beaming proudly at her parents' vicious insults. Kendrick was an African-American man who had climbed to the top of the city's political and architectural landscape. He had spent his entire life navigating rooms full of fake smiles, hidden agendas, and people who would smile in your face while plotting to stab you in the back. He knew exactly what toxicity looked like, and he recognized the ugly stench of a family scapegoating dynamic. He looked past my father's broad shoulder, his eyes finding mine one more time. I was calmly wiping a crumb from Lily's cheek with a linen napkin, entirely unbothered by the verbal firing squad happening 2 feet away. The stark contrast was undeniable. On one side, a frantic, cruel family, desperately trying to tear down their own blood to elevate themselves. On the other side, a quiet, composed mother prioritizing her child over petty drama. Kendrick slowly lowered his arm, deliberately shaking off Brittany's grip. He did not say a single word to validate my parents' insults. He did not nod in agreement or laugh at their cruel jokes. He simply stood there, a profound, heavy realization settling over his sharp features. The vibrant, glittering illusion my sister had spent months carefully crafting for him was rapidly disintegrating right before his eyes. He frowned, a deep, silent gesture of absolute disapproval. He was finally beginning to see the profound, suffocating toxicity and the grotesque hypocrisy of the family he had almost tied himself to. The silence stretching between us was a living, breathing entity. Kendrick stood there, processing the sheer venom my family had just spewed with quiet, analytical precision. I decided it was the perfect moment to throw a lighted match straight into the powder keg. I set my crystal water glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate clink. So, Kendrick, I began, my voice slicing through the heavy, toxic tension with absolute chilling clarity. I am genuinely curious about your overarching strategy for the South Bay Revitalization Project. Specifically, how does the City Planning Office intend to mitigate the fierce environmental impact pushback in Sector 4 while simultaneously addressing the hidden 14% deficit in the federal funding allocation? The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Kendrick froze entirely. The breath actually hitched in his throat. His dark eyes widened, locking onto mine with a mixture of profound shock and intense evaluating scrutiny. The South Bay Revitalization Project was not public knowledge. The specific zoning disputes in Sector 4 and the exact percentage of the federal funding deficit were highly classified government details. Only top-tier city officials, the mayor himself, and the elite crisis management team reviewing the blind bids had access to that exact data point. There was absolutely no logical way a struggling single mother working a minimum wage desk job could possibly know those numbers. He stared at me, his brilliant mind racing at breakneck speed to recalculate everything he thought he knew about the woman sitting calmly in front of him. He opened his mouth to speak, the polite, reserved facade completely gone, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of a seasoned political operative who had just uncovered a massive security breach. But before he could utter a single syllable, Brittany threw her head back and let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. The grating sound clashed violently against the elegant jazz music playing softly in the background. "Oh my God, Lauren, please stop!" Brittany mocked, waving her manicured hand dismissively in my direction, the rhinestone bracelets on her wrist clanking loudly. "You are embarrassing yourself so badly right now. Did you read some random local conspiracy blog on your phone while riding the bus today? You always try to use big complicated words to sound smart, and it is just sad. You do not know the first thing about urban planning or whatever it is Kendrick does at the office." Patricia eagerly joined in her forced, high-pitched laughter, echoing her youngest daughter's cruelty. "Lauren, sweetie, leave the complex business discussions to the educated men. You do not want to give yourself a migraine trying to understand things so far above your pay grade. Just sit quietly and stick to your little filing duties." Richard beamed, clearly thrilled that his wife and daughter were stepping up to put me back in my designated place at the bottom of the hierarchy. He looked at Kendrick, fully expecting the director of city planning to join in the mockery and dismiss me as a rambling fool. "You have to excuse her, Kendrick. She spends way too much time on the internet reading fake news. She loves to pretend she is important to compensate for her actual life." Kendrick did not laugh. He did not even crack a polite smile. He completely ignored Brittany, Patricia, and Richard, as if they were nothing more than background noise. His entire focus remained anchored heavily on me. He took a deliberate, measured step closer to my table, his posture shifting from a reluctant party guest to an investigator demanding immediate answers. "Where did you get that specific 14% figure?" Kendrick asked, his voice low, urgent, and entirely serious, cutting right through my family's ignorant laughter. "That environmental report has not even cleared my desk for public release yet." "Who exactly do you work for, Lauren?" I smiled, a slow, predatory curving of my lips. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to drop the illusion and tell him exactly who held the ironclad reins to his entire department. I was ready to watch my family's world burn to ashes right there in the middle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. But Richard panicked. He saw the intense, highly serious exchange happening between Kendrick and me, and his ruthless survival instincts kicked into overdrive. He realized that whatever I had just said had captured the undivided attention of the most important man in the room, and that completely threatened his carefully constructed narrative. With a sudden, aggressive burst of movement, Richard stepped physically between Kendrick and my table. He grabbed Kendrick by the arm, his grip tight and forceful, masked only by a loud, booming laugh that sounded incredibly strained and desperate. All right, enough boring shop talk for one evening," Richard declared, practically dragging the director of city planning away from my table by sheer brute force. "We are here to celebrate, not discuss dreary city politics. Kendrick, my boy, there are some very influential real estate investors over by the private bar who are absolutely dying to meet you. Let us go get you a proper glass of scotch and leave the women to their idle chatter." Kendrick tried to resist the momentum, casting one last, deeply searching look back at me over his shoulder. He wanted the answer. He needed to know how I possessed classified government intelligence. But Richard was a large, imposing man, and he used his physical bulk to bulldoze Kendrick through the crowded ballroom, completely cutting off our interaction. Brittany immediately scurried after them, clinging tightly to Kendrick's other arm, like a desperate barnacle, her dress flashing blindingly under the chandeliers. Patricia followed closely behind, acting as a rear guard to ensure I did not pursue them. I sat back in my chair, entirely unbothered by the crude interruption. The seed of absolute doubt had been firmly planted in Kendrick's mind. He was smart enough to figure it out, and the anticipation of the fallout was far more delicious than immediate gratification. I turned my attention back to Lily, who was busy arranging her colorful macarons into a neat, perfect circle on her china plate. Less than 2 minutes later, a heavy, suffocating shadow fell over my table. Richard had left his prize guests safely by the bar and marched straight back to me. His face was a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The thick veins in his neck were bulging dangerously against his tight tuxedo collar. He leaned down, placing both of his large hands flat on my table, looming over me with a deeply threatening, physically aggressive posture. He did not care who was watching anymore. He reached out and clamped his thick fingers down hard onto my bare shoulder. His grip was vicious, meant to inflict physical pain and establish absolute dominance. His nails dug into my skin, but I kept my face entirely impassive, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Listen to me very carefully, you worthless piece of trash," Richard growled, his voice a low, guttural rasp right next to my ear. "Mayor Thomas Harrison will be walking through those double doors any minute now. This night is the defining moment of my entire career. If you dare open your mouth to say one more stupid, nonsensical word to Kendrick or anyone else in this room, I will utterly destroy you." He leaned in closer, his hot breath washing over my face, his grip tightening on my shoulder until it bruised the flesh. "I have the most ruthless family lawyers in this state on my payroll," he threatened, his eyes completely devoid of any paternal connection or basic human decency. "If you ruin this night for me, I will drag you into family court. I will bury you in legal fees you cannot possibly afford. I will prove to a judge that you are an unfit, unstable mother living in poverty, and I will personally see to it that you are stripped of your custody rights forever. You will never see that little girl again. Do you understand me?" He shoved my shoulder back forcefully as he released his grip, standing up to his full height, his chest heaving with manufactured rage. The ultimate threat hung in the air between us, heavy and venomous. He thought he had played his ultimate winning card. He thought threatening to legally kidnap my child would break me into absolute cowering submission. I looked up at him, my eyes cold, calculating, and entirely dead. The final countdown had officially begun. I did not flinch when Richard delivered his threat. I simply held his gaze, letting the freezing temperature of my eyes communicate what words did not need to. He thought he possessed the ultimate leverage by threatening my custody of Lily. He was completely unaware that the family court judges in this district attended fundraising dinners organized by my firm. If he even attempted to file a motion against me, he would find himself blacklisted from every legal and political circle in the state before the ink dried. But I did not voice any of this. I let him bask in his delusion of absolute control. The physical pain in my shoulder from his brutal grip was temporary, but the destruction I was about to unleash upon his legacy would be permanent. Before Richard could issue another vile warning, the entire atmosphere within the Diamond Ballroom shifted. It was not a gradual change, it was an immediate visceral drop in barometric pressure. The lively, upbeat jazz music that had been filling the room abruptly ceased mid-measure. The lead trumpet player lowered his instrument, his eyes locked on the main entrance. The low, sophisticated hum of hundreds of wealthy guests chattering and clinking crystal champagne flutes completely died out, replaced by a sudden electrified silence. A visible ripple of anticipation surged through the crowd. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns instinctively took half steps backward, creating a wide, clear path straight down the center of the ballroom floor. It was as if an invisible force was pushing the city's elite aside. Through the towering gold-leafed double doors, 3 large men in dark, identical suits stepped into the venue. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that commanded absolute compliance. They were not hotel security. They were plainclothes police officers serving as an executive protection detail. Their eyes scanned the perimeter of the room, sharp and unyielding, their hands resting subtly near their waistbands. They took up strategic positions, securing the entrance and establishing a safe zone. Richard felt the shift in the room. He snapped his head toward the doors, and a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic electrified his bulky frame. The apex of his entire social climbing existence had arrived. He turned back to me, his face a mask of frantic desperation. "Get out of sight," Richard commanded in a harsh, breathless whisper. He did not wait for my compliance. He grabbed the back of my heavy wooden dining chair and violently shoved it backward, forcing me and Lily deeper into the shadowy alcove behind our table. The sudden movement made the crystal glasses rattle dangerously. He dragged a massive, towering floral arrangement on a marble pedestal directly into my line of sight, effectively barricading us in a dark, obscured corner of the ballroom. "Do not move, do not breathe, do not even look in his direction," Richard hissed, pointing a trembling finger right at my face. "You stay hidden behind these flowers until I tell you otherwise. If you ruin this introduction, I swear you will pay with everything you have." He did not wait for a response. He spun around frantically, straightening his bow tie and smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. He marched toward the center of the cleared path, gesturing wildly for Patricia and Brittany to join him. Patricia practically sprinted across the expensive carpet, her heels clicking rapidly. She pinched her cheeks to bring out a rosy flush and pasted on a wide plastic smile that looked completely unnatural. Brittany abandoned her conversation by the bar, dragging Kendrick along with her. She positioned herself perfectly at her father's right side, adjusting her glittering rhinestone dress to ensure it caught the maximum amount of chandelier light. They formed a tight, perfectly curated family unit at the exact edge of the cleared pathway. They stood shoulder to shoulder, projecting the ultimate image of suburban royalty, wealthy, successful, and completely united. They were a flawless billboard advertising everything Richard wanted the city's leadership to see. Kendrick stood a few feet away from their tight formation. He did not mirror their eager, desperate posture. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp gaze darting between the empty doorway and the dark, obscured corner where Richard had just forcefully shoved me. The gears in Kendrick's brilliant mind were still turning, analyzing the bizarre, hostile family dynamic he was witnessing. He recognized the stark contrast between Brittany's desperate need for attention and the quiet, immovable power I had displayed just moments ago. Then the moment arrived. Mayor Thomas Harrison stepped through the grand double doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. He was a man who needed no introduction. In his early 60s, with striking silver hair and a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, the mayor exuded a heavy gravitational pull. He did not just enter a room, he conquered it. He carried the weight of the city's entire political infrastructure on his shoulders, and his mere presence demanded absolute silence and respect from every single billionaire and corporate titan in the venue. Richard immediately leaned forward, bending at the waist in a deep, sycophantic bow. He plastered a massive fawning grin across his face, fully prepared to launch into a rehearsed speech about his construction empire and his beautiful, accomplished youngest daughter who was dating the mayor's brilliant son. Patricia and Brittany mirrored his eager posture, practically vibrating with excitement. They were waiting for the mayor to walk down the aisle, shake their hands, and validate their entire existence in front of high society. But the mayor did not smile. He did not wave to the crowd. He did not acknowledge the eager applause that a few sycophants near the front attempted to start. Mayor Thomas Harrison stopped dead in his tracks just 2 steps inside the ballroom. His face was set in a deadly, uncompromising scowl. The jovial, public-facing persona he usually wore to charity galas and campaign fundraisers was entirely absent. He looked like a general stepping onto a battlefield where things had gone terribly wrong. His piercing, intelligent eyes swept over the hundreds of wealthy guests lining the pathway. He looked right past the sparkling jewels, the expensive champagne, and the desperate smiles. He completely ignored Richard, Patricia, and Brittany, who were standing right in his direct line of sight, practically begging for his attention. His gaze swept straight over their heads, as if they were nothing more than decorative furniture. He was not here for a birthday party. He was not here to glad hand local contractors. The mayor was scanning every single face in the massive ballroom, with a frantic, severe intensity searching the crowd for one specific person. The air in the diamond ballroom was so thick with anticipation, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the guests. Hundreds of the most influential socialites, real estate moguls, and local politicians held their collective breath, their eyes glued to the grand entrance. Mayor Thomas Harrison stood there like a titan surveying a battlefield. His silver hair caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, but his expression was darker than a winter storm. He was not here to shake hands or kiss babies. He was on a mission. Richard saw this as his ultimate crowning moment of triumph. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this single party, invited the absolute most elite circle he could muster, and positioned his golden child directly in the path of absolute power. In his arrogant, narrow mind, the mayor of the city had arrived specifically to bless his construction empire and officially welcome our family into the political aristocracy. Unable to contain his desperate, suffocating greed, Richard broke every unspoken rule of high society etiquette. He did not wait for the mayor to make his rounds or be formally introduced by the event staff. He lunged forward, stepping directly into the center of the cleared aisle, completely blocking the path of the most powerful man in the state. He dragged Patricia and Brittany along with him, forming a physical barricade of desperate ambition. Richard thrust both of his large, sweaty hands out in front of him, his face splitting into a massive, obsequious grin that looked more like a painful grimace. "Mayor Harrison, what an absolute profound honor!" Richard boomed his voice, deliberately projecting across the silent ballroom, so that every single billionaire and competitor present could hear his supposed intimacy with the city's leader. "I am Richard, the host of this magnificent gala. Welcome to my 65th birthday celebration. I cannot tell you how thrilled we are that you made the time to attend our humble family gathering." The mayor did not slow his pace. His piercing eyes were still scanning the far corners of the room, looking over the heads of the crowd with an intense, searching urgency. Richard, entirely oblivious to the icy reception, pushed his chest out and gestured wildly to his right. "And this is my beautiful wife, Patricia, and my youngest daughter, Brittany. I believe you already know her boyfriend, your brilliant son, Kendrick. We are just so incredibly proud of the two of them. We were just discussing the bright future of our city and how my construction firm is perfectly positioned to handle the upcoming South Bay revitalization project. Family is everything, Mayor. We are so excited to join forces with yours." It was a grotesque, transparent display of nepotism and bribery. Richard had essentially just asked for a multi-million-dollar government contract in the middle of a ballroom, using his daughter's relationship as leverage. Kendrick, standing just a few feet away, visibly recoiled. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, profound second-hand embarrassment washing over his sharp features. The sheer lack of class, the aggressive, unrefined desperation of Richard's speech was staggering, but the true devastation came a fraction of a second later. Mayor Thomas Harrison did not reach out to take Richard's eagerly extended hands. He did not offer a polite political smile. He did not say congratulations on your birthday. He did not even look at Brittany or Patricia. The mayor walked straight through them. He did not break his commanding stride for a single microsecond. He moved with such relentless, unyielding momentum that Richard was physically forced to stumble backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes to avoid being trampled by the mayor's security detail. The draft of the mayor's tailored charcoal suit violently fluttered the fabric of Patricia's gown as he brushed past her, leaving a wake of freezing, dismissive air behind him. He treated my father like an inanimate object, an annoying architectural column that had been carelessly placed in his path. He walked past the golden child, past the fawning wife, and past the desperate, greedy patriarch, as if they were entirely invisible. The silence in the diamond ballroom was absolute. It was deafening. It was the kind of profound, agonizing quiet that follows a catastrophic public execution. Richard's thick hands were left suspended in the empty air, grasping at absolutely nothing. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. His massive, booming voice died in his throat, replaced by a pathetic, strangled wheeze. Patricia let out a soft, horrified gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth, as she realized the entire upper echelon of the city had just witnessed her husband being publicly discarded like trash. Brittany stood frozen, her rhinestone dress suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous under the glaring lights. Her carefully practiced smile melted off her face, replaced by raw, unadulterated shock. The whispers began immediately. Hushed, venomous murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. The wealthy elite were ruthless, and they had just been given front-row seats to the social slaughter of a man who had tried too hard to climb the ladder. Competitors exchanged mocking smirks. Wives leaned into their husbands, shaking their heads in pity and disgust. Richard's reputation, the pristine, powerful image he had spent his entire life and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to build, had been utterly annihilated in less than 10 seconds without the mayor uttering a single word. Kendrick Harrison watched the scene unfold with cold, detached realization. His father's brutal dismissal confirmed every single dark suspicion he had harbored since stepping into the ballroom. This family was a toxic, delusional fraud, and the mayor of the city knew it. The mayor continued his march down the center of the ballroom, completely unaffected by the social devastation he had just left in his wake. His security detail shadowed him closely, keeping the gawking guests at bay. His severe, urgent gaze swept past the towering ice sculptures, past the silenced 12-piece jazz band, and past the lavishly decorated VIP tables at the front. Then his eyes stopped moving. His sharp, unyielding stare locked onto the darkest, most obscured corner of the venue, the exact corner where Richard had violently shoved my chair to hide me from the world. The corner barricaded by a massive, excessive floral arrangement on a marble pedestal. Through a gap in the white roses and orchids, I sat perfectly still in the shadows. I was completely unbothered by the dramatic spectacle that had just occurred. I held a small silver dessert fork in my hand, calmly feeding a piece of rich chocolate cake to Lily, who was happily swinging her legs in her velvet dress, entirely insulated from the surrounding chaos. The entire ballroom held its breath, completely paralyzed by anticipation. The guests watched in absolute bewilderment as the most powerful man in the state abruptly changed his trajectory. He turned his back on the billionaires and the politicians, steering himself directly toward the hidden, rejected daughter, sitting quietly in the dark. The steady, heavy footsteps of Mayor Thomas Harrison echoed like a death knell across the polished marble and plush carpet of the Diamond Ballroom. The crowd parted completely, creating a wide, unobstructed avenue that led directly to the darkest, most obscured corner of the venue. The silence in the room was so absolute, so suffocatingly tense, that the clink of a single dropped champagne flute in the distance sounded like a gunshot. The mayor did not deviate from his path. His security detail moved in perfect synchronized tandem alongside him. As they reached the edge of my designated exile, the lead plainclothes officer did not wait for a command. He stepped forward and effortlessly grabbed the massive towering marble pedestal holding the extravagant arrangement of white orchids that Richard had violently shoved in front of my table. With a sharp shove, the officer moved the heavy barricade aside. The physical wall my father had built to hide his shame was instantly eradicated. The bright, glaring light of the crystal chandeliers flooded the alcove, illuminating my table for the entire ballroom to see. I sat there with absolute terrifying stillness. I did not flinch under the sudden spotlight. I did not shrink away from the hundreds of elite eyes now burning into me. I simply held a silver dessert fork, calmly wiping a tiny smudge of chocolate frosting from the corner of Lily's mouth with a crisp white linen napkin. Mayor Harrison stepped into the cleared space. The severe, battle-hardened scowl that had just pulverized my father's ego completely vanished. The heavy, intimidating mantle of political power seemed to evaporate into the air. He looked down at my table, and his entire posture softened into something warm, genuine, and deeply familiar. To the absolute astonishment of every billionaire socialite and real estate developer standing in the Diamond Ballroom, the most powerful man in the state did the unthinkable. He did not offer a polite political handshake. He did not issue a formal greeting. Mayor Thomas Harrison dropped down onto one knee right there on the expensive patterned carpet. He brought himself completely down to eye level with my 5-year-old daughter. He ignored the crease it put in his meticulously tailored charcoal suit. He ignored the fact that the entire upper echelon of the city was watching him with their jaws virtually unhinged. He opened his arms wide, a massive, brilliant smile breaking across his face. "There is my favorite girl in the whole city," the mayor declared, his voice echoing through the silent room. It was no longer a booming, authoritative command, but a rich, affectionate rumble of pure joy. "Tommy's little princess, did you finish drawing that picture for me?" Lily dropped her silver fork onto her china plate with a clatter. Her face lit up with pure, unadulterated delight. She did not see the mayor of the city, a man who controlled billions of dollars in urban development funds. She just saw her favorite Uncle Tommy, the man who always kept a stash of cherry lollipops in his desk drawer just for her. She launched herself out of her heavy wooden dining chair and threw her small arms tightly around his neck, giggling happily. "I used all the blue crayons just for you, Uncle Tommy," Lily chirped loudly, her sweet, innocent voice piercing the dead silence of the ballroom. "I drew a big boat for us to go on." The mayor laughed, a deep, booming sound of genuine happiness. He wrapped his arms around my daughter, lifting her effortlessly off the ground and spinning her around once before pulling her into a tight hug. "I cannot wait to see it, sweetie," he said, completely unbothered by the fact that Lily was currently smearing chocolate cake crumbs directly onto the lapel of his expensive suit jacket. "I am going to put it right on the very front of my big refrigerator." A collective audible gasp swept through the room. It was the sound of hundreds of minds simultaneously snapping as they tried to process the impossible visual in front of them. The elite guests stared in sheer unadulterated disbelief. The juxtaposition was violently clear. My father had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to buy a fraction of the mayor's attention. He had aggressively paraded his golden child and his wealth, desperately begging for a single nod of political validation. He had been brutally publicly ignored. Meanwhile, the daughter he had banished to the shadows, the single mother he had just threatened to destroy, commanded the mayor's absolute unconditional devotion. Kendrick Harrison stood a few yards away, watching his powerful father embrace the child of the woman his girlfriend had just viciously mocked. His sharp eyes tracked the genuine affection radiating between his father and my daughter. The final damning pieces of the puzzle clicked violently into place in his brilliant mind. He realized the sheer catastrophic magnitude of the lie he had been sold by Brittany and her parents. I slowly lifted my gaze from my daughter and the mayor. I looked straight across the cleared pathway cutting through the crowd until my eyes locked onto my family. Richard, Patricia, and Brittany were standing exactly where the mayor had left them. They were completely paralyzed. They looked like statues carved out of ice. The arrogant, triumphant smirks they had worn mere minutes ago, when they thought they were ruining my life, had been utterly obliterated. Every single drop of blood had drained from their faces, leaving them a sickly, translucent white. Patricia's hands were shaking uncontrollably where they hovered near her chest. Brittany's mouth was hanging open, her eyes wide with a primal, suffocating terror, as the reality of the situation fractured her fragile ego. Richard looked like he had stopped breathing entirely. His broad shoulders were slumped, and a cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. "Who exactly are you?" the mayor asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the immediate attention of every single guest in the ballroom. "And how dare you interrupt a private conversation to hurl baseless, insulting accusations at my chief political strategist?" Brittany flinched as if she had been physically struck. The harsh, uncompromising tone of the mayor's voice shattered whatever remaining illusion she had about her own importance. She opened her mouth, her eyes darting frantically toward Kendrick, who was standing frozen on the other side of the room, looking at her with absolute, undeniable disgust. "I am Brittany," she stammered, her voice losing all its previous bravado, shrinking into a pathetic, trembling squeak. "I am Kendrick's girlfriend. I am just trying to protect you, Mr. Mayor. She is lying to you. My parents can prove it. She does not even have a real job." I sat back in my chair, the heavy silk of my bespoke gown pooling elegantly around my legs. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to defend myself against her pathetic, crumbling narrative. I simply looked at the mayor, offering a mild, almost apologetic smile for the unruly behavior of my blood relatives. "Thomas," I said, my voice carrying that effortless, quiet power that always commanded a room. "Please forgive the interruption. As I have mentioned in the past, my biological family is entirely disconnected from my professional reality. They operate under a rather tragic set of delusions." The mayor nodded slowly, his sharp eyes never leaving Brittany's terrified face. His expression shifted from anger to a profound, chilling pity. The kind of pity reserved for an insect right before it is stepped on. "I see," the mayor stated firmly. He straightened his suit jacket, projecting the full, unyielding weight of his office. "Well, young lady, allow me to clarify reality for you and your parents. Lauren is not a dropout, nor is she a failure. She is the founder and CEO of Vanguard Strategic Management. She operates in the highest echelons of state politics, negotiating contracts that dwarf your entire family's net worth. If she wanted to, she could purchase this entire hotel and shut down this event with a single phone call." Brittany's jaw literally dropped. She stared at me, the blood completely draining from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow beneath her heavy makeup. The words CEO and Vanguard Strategic Management hit her like physical blows. "And as for you being my son's girlfriend," the mayor continued, his voice turning even colder, striking the final fatal blow to Brittany's collapsing world. "Kendrick is a brilliant planner, but if he lacks the basic judgment to recognize the sheer toxicity radiating from you and your parents, then we will be having a very serious discussion about his future in my administration. I do not tolerate fools, and I certainly do not associate my family with people who publicly disrespect the woman keeping this city afloat." Brittany staggered backward, her rhinestone heels wobbling dangerously. She looked toward her father for salvation, but Richard was completely paralyzed, his eyes wide with a primal, suffocating terror. He finally realized the catastrophic magnitude of what he had done. He had not just insulted his daughter. He had publicly declared war on the most powerful political entity in the state. Kendrick Harrison finally moved. The heavy, suffocating silence of the Diamond Ballroom amplified the sound of his measured footsteps against the polished marble floor. He did not rush. He walked with the deliberate, heavy grace of a man who had just solved a highly complex, deeply disturbing puzzle. He bypassed the terrified forms of Richard and Patricia, not even offering them a passing glance, and took his rightful place directly beside his father, Mayor Thomas Harrison. Kendrick looked down at Brittany. The glamorous illusion she had maintained for months evaporated entirely under his intense analytical scrutiny. Earlier this evening, he had looked at her with mild affection. Now his dark eyes held nothing but profound, chilling disappointment. It was the absolute clinical detachment of an urban planner condemning a toxic, structurally unsound building to be demolished. Brittany tried to reach for his hand, her rhinestone bracelets clinking desperately together, but Kendrick calmly folded his hands behind his back, denying her the physical contact she so desperately craved. "What exactly are you talking about?" Brittany Kendrick asked. His voice was not a shout. It was a smooth, resonant baritone that sliced through the tension like a scalpel, carrying effortlessly to every single wealthy guest politician and business rival eagerly listening in the room. "Are you truly this blind, or simply this consumed by your own manufactured malice?" Brittany gasped, a pathetic, strangled sound escaping her throat, but Kendrick did not allow her a moment to formulate another lie. He turned his body, slightly gesturing toward me, with a level of professional reverence that made the surrounding billionaires stand up straighter. "You stand here in front of the city elite and attempt to humiliate this woman." Kendrick continued, his tone sharp and unrelenting. "Lauren is not some entry-level clerk. She is the senior strategic director of the most formidable crisis management firm in the state. Her company serves as the exclusive confidential consultant for my father's entire political campaign fund." A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Powerful real estate developers who had previously ignored me were suddenly whispering to their assistants, calculating how quickly they could get my business card. Kendrick took a step closer to his former girlfriend, his towering presence forcing her to shrink backward. "Do you have any concept of how government infrastructure operates, Brittany? Do you comprehend the magnitude of the South Bay revitalization project I manage? It is a multi-billion-dollar urban development initiative." He paused, letting the astronomical financial figure hang heavily in the air. "My department drafts the blueprints and submits the municipal bids," Kendrick declared, his eyes locking onto hers with lethal precision. "But the person who audits those bids for political viability, the exact person currently holding the unilateral absolute veto power over the entire South Bay project, is your sister." The revelation hit the golden child with the devastating force of a physical strike. Brittany physically wilted. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and the aggressive, sparkling rhinestone dress suddenly looked like a cheap, heavy cage dragging her down to the floor. The arrogant, triumphant smirk she had weaponized against me her entire life was entirely erased, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Kendrick, praying for a lifeline, a joke, a sign that he was bluffing. She found a brick wall of absolute rejection. She realized in that agonizing split second that she had not just lost a wealthy, prestigious boyfriend. She had publicly exposed herself as a vicious, ignorant fraud in front of the very high society she worshipped. Her knees buckled slightly, her manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth as a humiliated, silent sob tore through her throat. While Brittany crumbled under the weight of her own shattered ego, a far more catastrophic realization was taking place a few feet away. Richard had been standing rigid, his brain struggling to process the impossible data pouring from Kendrick's mouth. "Senior Strategic Director, Exclusive Campaign Consultant, Absolute Veto Power over the South Bay Project." The words bounced around his skull, echoing louder and louder until they formed a terrifying, inescapable conclusion. The South Bay Project was the sole lifeline for his entire construction empire. He was severely over-leveraged, drowning in hidden corporate debts and banking his entire legacy on winning that specific municipal contract. He had thrown this lavish 65th birthday gala, drained his personal accounts to rent this ballroom, and invited the city's elite for the sole purpose of courting the mayor to secure that bid. And less than 20 minutes ago, he had violently grabbed the shoulder of the woman holding the veto pen. He had threatened to drag her into family court to steal her child. He had commanded his security guards to throw her out into the street like garbage. The air completely left Richard's lungs. His vision blurred rapidly, the sparkling crystal chandeliers above spinning violently in his line of sight. He staggered backward, his heavy leather shoes catching awkwardly on the thick, patterned carpet. He bumped hard into a catered cocktail table, sending a dozen crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor in a sharp, glittering explosion of shattered glass. He gripped the edge of the table with white knuckles to keep himself from collapsing entirely. His chest heaved, a cold, terrified sweat drenching his stiff tuxedo collar. The music was dead. The room was staring. He looked across the cleared marble floor, past the mayor, past Kendrick, directly into my eyes. He finally understood the gravity of his fatal mistake. The lifeblood of his company, his hoarded wealth, his public reputation, and his entire future was resting squarely in the palm of the daughter he had just ruthlessly banished. The sound of shattering crystal was still ringing in the ears of the bewildered guests. A normal man would have crumbled under the heavy weight of such profound public humiliation. A man with a single shred of dignity would have quietly signaled his wife, gathered his weeping youngest daughter, and slipped out the service exit to lick his wounds in private. But my father was not a normal man. Richard possessed the terrifying, impenetrable armor of a true narcissist. In his warped transactional reality, shame did not actually exist. Only leverage existed. And right now, looking across the cleared ballroom floor, he realized the ultimate leverage was sitting at the exact table he had just tried to forcefully barricade. I watched his face undergo a horrifying real-time transformation. The sickly pale terror that had gripped his features melted away in an instant, replaced by a chilling, predatory calculation. The cold sweat on his forehead was quickly wiped away with a crisp linen pocket square. He stood up straight, inflating his chest to its maximum capacity, completely ignoring the pool of expensive champagne and broken glass soaking into the carpet at his feet. He plastered on a wide, booming smile that stretched so far across his face, it looked physically painful. It was a smile completely devoid of any genuine warmth, fueled entirely by desperate, bottomless greed. He stepped away from the mess, marching right past Mayor Thomas Harrison and Kendrick, as if the devastating exchange that just occurred was nothing more than a playful family misunderstanding. He strode directly toward my table. The heavy, measured thud of his leather shoes on the carpet felt like a grotesque parody of a proud patriarch. The hundreds of watching socialites, business rivals, and politicians stared in absolute morbid fascination. They could not believe the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the man. Patricia watched him from the sidelines, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer, hoping his insane gamble would somehow save their sinking ship. "Lauren, my brilliant girl," Richard boomed, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom with sickening manufactured affection. He threw his arms wide open, aiming to project the flawless image of a loving, supportive father reunited with his prodigy. He moved to stand right beside my chair, reaching out his thick, sweaty arm to pull me into a tight, possessive embrace. He wanted the cameras, the press, and the politicians to capture this moment of fabricated unity. "I always knew my eldest daughter would do great things," Richard announced loudly to the room, making sure his voice carried to the back rows. "I told everyone. I said, just watch Lauren. She has the family drive. She has that unstoppable, ruthless business instinct she inherited directly from me." He did not even wait for me to acknowledge his ridiculous lies. He instantly pivoted his head toward Mayor Harrison, his eyes gleaming with a manic, starving hunger for power. "Mayor, you see what an incredible team we make." Richard pitched, his tone shifting into the aggressive cadence of a desperate salesman closing a deal. "Blood is thicker than water, and this family is a powerhouse. With Lauren's brilliant strategic mind securing the city planning and my unparalleled construction empire handling the groundwork, the South Bay project is guaranteed to be a historic triumph. You can just hand the contract to our family company right now. We will keep everything entirely in-house. We are the ultimate asset to your administration." He brought his heavy hand down, intending to clap me affectionately on the shoulder to seal the visual of our unbreakable family bond. It was the very same shoulder he had brutally squeezed and bruised less than 20 minutes ago when he threatened to steal my child. He never made contact. Before his thick fingers could even graze the black silk of my dress, I moved. I brought my hand up in a swift, violent strike, slapping his heavy forearm away with a sharp, resounding smack that echoed like a gunshot across the quiet room. The physical rejection was absolute, visceral, and totally unforgiving. Richard gasped, stumbling back half a step, cradling his rejected arm. The fake jovial smile froze entirely on his face, cracking at the edges. I slowly stood up from my chair, rising to my full height. I smoothed the front of my gown, completely unhurried. I did not break eye contact with him for a single fraction of a second. My eyes were cold, calculated, and sharp as razors. The room held its collective breath, the tension spiking to dangerous electric levels. The air between us dropped to freezing temperatures. I looked at the man who had abandoned me in a hospital, who had belittled my existence, who had weaponized my own daughter, and who now actually thought he could simply claim my hard-earned political empire as his own personal achievement. "Did you honestly think I wore black tie tonight to celebrate you?" I asked, my voice a deadly quiet whisper that carried perfectly through the dead silence of the ballroom. I did not wait for his stuttering, pathetic response. I smoothly reached down to the table and unsnapped the gold clasp of my designer handbag. My hand slipped inside the smooth leather interior of my handbag. I bypassed my phone and my keys, my fingers closing around the thick, heavy manila folder I had instructed my lead operative to bring me earlier that evening. I pulled it out and slammed it onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sharp thud echoed across the room like a heavy wooden gavel striking a judge's block. The front of the folder bore the unmistakable, deeply embossed red seal of the City Planning Commission. It was a seal that every single contractor, real estate mogul, and politician in that ballroom recognized instantly. It was the absolute, undeniable mark of municipal authority. I picked up the folder and held it up for the entire room to see. I did not raise my voice to an undignified scream. I projected it from my diaphragm using the exact vocal technique I employed when addressing crowded, hostile press briefing rooms. I wanted every single billionaire, potential investor, and high society socialite in this room to hear exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. "You stand here tonight boasting about your massive construction empire," I declared, my voice slicing through the heavy, stagnant air of the ballroom. "You try to leverage my name, my daughter, and my professional standing to secure the South Bay revitalization contract. But my firm does not deal in nepotism. We deal in exhaustive, uncompromising due diligence. And what my independent investigation uncovered about your business practices is nothing short of criminal." Richard tried to lunge forward to snatch the folder from my hands, desperate to stop the truth from spilling out. But Mayor Thomas Harrison stepped smoothly into his path, becoming an impenetrable human shield. The mayor's security detail immediately tightened their perimeter, their hands resting firmly on their belts in a silent, deadly warning. Richard froze mid-step, his eyes darting frantically between me and the armed officers. He was entirely trapped. "Let us talk about the Riverside housing development you completed last year." I continued, flipping open the heavy cover of the dossier and extracting the top document. "According to these official engineering audit reports, your company deliberately substituted high-grade structural steel with cheap substandard unapproved alloys to maximize your own profit margins. You compromised the structural integrity of residential buildings meant to house hundreds of families just so you could buy another vacation home." Patricia let out a high, horrified gasp, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were choking her. Brittany looked utterly lost, unable to comprehend the complex legal and architectural terminology, but she understood perfectly well from the tone of my voice that her lavish credit card-funded lifestyle was evaporating into thin air. "But that is not even the worst part," I said, dropping the first document and picking up a second, significantly thicker stack of paper. "These are sworn affidavits from your subcontractors. They detail systematic wage theft, severe OSHA safety violations, and the deliberate exploitation of undocumented workers who were explicitly threatened with deportation if they dared to report your hazardous job sites. You built your pristine, supposedly untouchable legacy on the backs of abused laborers and fraudulent material reports." The silence in the Diamond Ballroom was absolute and terrifying. The clinking of ice in crystal glasses stopped. The quiet murmurs of the elite crowd completely vanished. The wealthy investors who had been shaking Richard's hand just an hour ago were now staring at him with expressions of profound disgust and legal apprehension. In the high-stakes corporate world, association with a federally investigated fraudster was professional suicide. Richard was visibly trembling now. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound managed to escape his throat. The arrogant, booming patriarch who had forcefully shoved me into a dark corner an hour ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, cornered criminal, watching the walls close in around him. "You invited the city's elite here tonight to secure the South Bay project," I announced, lifting my chin, ready to deliver the final fatal strike to his empire. You thought you could bribe your way into a government contract using your daughter's boyfriend. But as the chief strategic advisor and the sole authority overseeing the integrity of these municipal bids, I took action. I officially signed the executive decision to permanently disqualify your construction firm from the South Bay project at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. Your bid is dead, Richard. Your company is blacklisted from every future city contract indefinitely. I took the official bid proposal bearing his proud company logo, held it up high in the air, and ripped it straight down the middle. I tore it again, tossing the shredded pieces onto the table, letting the paper scatter carelessly over the expensive, towering floral centerpieces. Richard let out a ragged, strangled gasp. He brought his large hands up to his chest, gripping the lapels of his expensive tuxedo tightly, as if trying to hold his heart inside his rib cage. He stumbled backward, his face turning a dangerous, mottled purple as he struggled to pull oxygen into his rapidly collapsing lungs. His chest heaved violently, his eyes bulging with the sheer catastrophic shock of losing absolutely everything he valued in the span of 3 minutes. But nobody rushed forward to help him. The reaction from the surrounding crowd of wealthy guests was immediate, calculated, and utterly ruthless. The elite business partners, the very people Richard had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to impress tonight, began to physically step back. They moved away from my family in synchronized, silent waves, treating them like they were carrying a highly contagious, lethal disease. Hushed, frantic whispers hissed through the ballroom as investors hurriedly pulled out their cell phones, texting their own legal teams and calculating their financial exposure to his corrupt firm. They were severing ties in real time, actively abandoning the sinking ship to avoid being dragged into the impending federal and state investigations. The social climbing ladder Richard had spent his entire life building was kicked out from under him by the very people he worshipped. He was left completely isolated in the center of his own lavish party, clutching his chest, gasping for air, surrounded by the total ruins of his destroyed empire. The deafening silence that followed my revelation was shattered only by Richard's ragged breathing. But while my father was suffocating under the weight of his own ruined empire, another kind of panic was taking hold just a few feet away. Brittany stood trembling in her heavy rhinestone gown. Her eyes darted wildly around the diamond ballroom. She watched the city's elite, the very people she had spent her entire evening trying to impress physically, turning their backs on her family. The reality of her situation crashed into her with brutal force. There would be no more unlimited credit cards, no more luxury shopping sprees funded by fraudulent construction bids. The golden pedestal our parents had placed her on was entirely funded by the stolen wages of exploited workers, and I had just detonated it. Desperation is a powerful catalyst. Brittany realized she had exactly one lifeline left in the room. She spun around her heels, slipping slightly on the polished marble floor, and threw herself toward Kendrick Harrison. She lunged at him, her manicured hands snatching at the sleeve of his tailored midnight blue tuxedo. She gripped his arm with a fierce, frantic strength. The tears started flowing instantly. It was a masterful performance, a sudden switch from the arrogant, mocking mean girl to a helpless, terrified victim. Heavy mascara ran down her cheeks as she looked up at the director of city planning with wide, pleading eyes. "Kendrick, please," Brittany sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet space. "You have to do something. You have to talk to your father. You have to tell him Lauren is lying. She is just jealous. She has always been jealous of me and my success. Please, baby, you know me. You know my family. We are good people. You have to save us from this crazy vendetta. Tell the mayor to ignore her fake documents. Use your power, Kendrick. Fix this for me." She pressed her body against his arm, burying her tear-stained face into his shoulder, expecting the protective embrace she had always demanded from the men in her life. She expected Kendrick to wrap his arms around her, to shield her from the public scrutiny, and to blindly defend her honor against my accusations. Kendrick did not move. He did not wrap his arms around her. He stood as rigid as a marble statue. Slowly, he looked down at the woman clinging to his tuxedo. The expression on his face was entirely devoid of warmth, affection, or even basic pity. His sharp, intelligent eyes analyzed her frantic tears, and saw nothing but a shallow, transparent manipulation tactic. He had spent the last hour watching this exact same woman ruthlessly mock a single mother. He had watched her laugh as her parents verbally abused her own sister. He had seen the absolute ugliness rotting beneath her glittering exterior, and there was no amount of crying that could erase that horrific display. With a slow, deliberate, and agonizingly cold motion, Kendrick reached over with his free hand. He did not gently comfort her. He took hold of Brittany's wrists and forcefully peeled her fingers off his jacket. He pushed her hands away, stepping back to create a stark physical boundary between them. Brittany gasped, her fake sobs catching in her throat. She stared at him, completely paralyzed by the physical rejection. Kendrick smoothed the wrinkled fabric of his sleeve, his jaw locked tight. When he finally spoke, his rich baritone voice carried a freezing, absolute finality that cut through her desperate act. "Do not ever ask me to leverage my position to cover up a felony," Kendrick stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "And do not insult my intelligence by claiming you are the victim here. I have spent this entire evening watching you and your parents revel in your own cruelty. I watched you actively try to destroy a woman who has done nothing but secure this city's future. You paraded me around this ballroom not as a partner, but as a shiny trophy to boost your own pathetic social standing. You wanted to use my name to secure a corrupt contract for your father's fraudulent company." Brittany shook her head frantically, her rhinestone earrings clanking loudly in the quiet room. "No, Kendrick, that is not true. I love you. We are building a life together. You cannot just abandon me because my sister is throwing a tantrum. A family that can ruthlessly trample their own flesh and blood just for vain pride, and a woman who only knows how to use me to show off." Kendrick said, his words falling like a guillotine blade on her remaining hopes. "We are finished here, Brittany." He turned his back on her, dismissing her entire existence with a single brutal pivot. The rejection was absolute. The finality of his words struck Brittany with physical force. Her knees, already trembling from the shock of the evening, completely gave out. She collapsed. Her body crumpled onto the floor of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the heavy rhinestone dress pooling around her in a pathetic, glittering heap. She hit the carpet hard, her hands covering her face as genuine, humiliated wails finally tore from her throat. She had lost her status, her wealth, and the powerful man she thought was her golden ticket. She had absolutely nothing left. Seeing her golden child collapse onto the floor, Patricia snapped out of her frozen state. The shock shattered, replaced by a wild, feral panic. Her husband was gasping for air, her daughter was sobbing on the carpet, and the future of her high society life was turning to ash. Patricia let out a piercing, desperate scream. "Kendrick, wait. You cannot do this to her. We are a good family." She lunged forward, her hands outstretched, intending to grab Kendrick's arm and physically drag him back to her sobbing daughter. She moved with frantic, unpredictable energy, entirely abandoning her poised aristocratic facade. She never reached him. Before Patricia could take 3 steps toward the director of city planning, the mayor's executive protection detail reacted. 2 massive plainclothes security officers stepped smoothly and swiftly into her path. They did not draw weapons, but their physical intervention was an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark suits. One officer raised a firm, flat hand, pressing it squarely against Patricia's shoulder, stopping her forward momentum with absolute unyielding force. "Ma'am, step back immediately," the officer commanded, his voice a low, terrifying warning. "Do not approach the director." Patricia slammed against the officer's arm, her expensive evening gown twisting around her legs. She let out a loud, pathetic wail, completely losing the last shred of her dignity in front of the entire city's elite. She clawed frantically at the empty air, screaming for Kendrick to come back, screaming for someone to fix the catastrophic ruin of her perfect life, while the security guards held her firmly at bay, isolating the toxic remnants of my family in the very center of their own destroyed celebration. Patricia realized the mayor and Kendrick were entirely beyond her reach. The security officers stood like granite walls, completely immune to her hysterical tears and frantic clawing. Her desperate eyes darted wildly around the ruined ballroom before finally locking onto me. The psychological switch in her demeanor was instantaneous and entirely stomach-churning. The vicious, sneering woman who had just tried to pay me $500 to disappear from her sight suddenly morphed into the picture of a devastated, loving mother. She stumbled away from the guards, her expensive gown dragging heavily across the carpet, littered with broken glass and spilled champagne. She practically threw herself toward my table, her hands clasped together in front of her chest, as if she were approaching a sacred altar to pray. "Lauren, my sweet girl, please." Patricia sobbed, her voice trembling with deeply manufactured agony. "You have to stop this right now. You have made your point perfectly clear. You are powerful and successful, and we are so incredibly proud of you. But you cannot destroy your father's life work over a simple misunderstanding. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. Family has to come first, Lauren. You know I love you. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood." She reached out her trembling fingers, hovering just inches from my arm, desperately hoping I would reach back and offer her the ultimate forgiveness she had never once earned. She was playing her final, most manipulative card, the sacred, untouchable bond of motherhood. She actually believed that invoking the title of mother would automatically erase 33 years of systematic emotional abuse, profound neglect, and absolute cruelty. I shifted my stance slightly, wrapping my arms securely around Lily to shield my daughter from Patricia's frantic, toxic energy. I sat perfectly still and looked down at the woman weeping in front of me. I searched my own heart, genuinely curious to see if there was even a microscopic fraction of sympathy left for the person who gave birth to me. There was absolutely nothing. The well was completely dry. I looked at her tear-stained face, and I felt zero empathy. I did not see a mother pleading for her child. I saw a parasite panicking entirely because its wealthy host was dying. My face remained an impenetrable mask of carved ice. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not reach out to comfort her trembling hands. The surrounding billionaire guests watched in hushed horror as Patricia groveled on the floor, completely stripping away whatever aristocratic dignity she had left. I slowly stood up, letting the heavy silk of my bespoke dress fall flawlessly around me. I towered over her crouching, pathetic form. The air in the ballroom seemed to drop another 10 degrees as I took a deep, steadying breath. I looked down at the architects of my lifelong pain, ready to sever the rotting ties once and for all. I opened my mouth, my voice ringing out with a cold, hollow finality that would haunt her nightmares for the rest of her life. "Your version of motherhood died a long time ago, Patricia." I stated, my voice echoing with a freezing, absolute certainty. "It died the night you threw my daughter and me away, to protect this empty, hollow reputation you worship. You chose luxury over your own flesh and blood. You chose a ski trip over my hospital bed. You chose a cheap illusion of perfection over reality. So do not stand here and invoke family now that your bank accounts are bleeding out. Do not ever speak my name again." Patricia physically recoiled as if she had been struck by lightning. Her hands dropped from her chest, and the theatrical sobs completely vanished, replaced by the silent, gaping horror of a woman who finally realized she had played her last card and lost everything. She crumpled onto the carpet next to the shattered crystal, a pathetic heap of designer fabric and ruined ambition. I did not offer her a hand. I turned my back on her, shifting my focus to the wider room. The diamond ballroom, which had been buzzing with lively jazz and the clinking of expensive champagne flutes just an hour ago, had transformed into a sprawling, opulent graveyard. It was a spectacular funeral for my father's carefully constructed legacy. The elite guests, the billionaires, the politicians, and the powerful real estate developers were practically sprinting toward the heavy double doors. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a federally investigated fraudster. They abandoned their half-eaten plates of lobster and Wagyu beef. Women clutched their silk wraps, pulling their husbands toward the exit, casting terrified, disgusted glances back at my father. The musicians on the mahogany stage were hastily packing their brass instruments into velvet-lined cases, eager to escape the suffocating tension. The waitstaff stood frozen against the walls, watching the mass exodus of the city's most powerful figures. Richard was still leaning heavily against the catered cocktail table, his face a terrifying shade of gray. He watched his entire network of investors evaporate into the night. But his nightmare was far from over. The general manager of the Ritz-Carlton, who had treated me with absolute reverence earlier, now marched directly toward my father. He was no longer offering the warm, accommodating smile of a hospitality executive. He looked like a debt collector arriving to seize a foreclosed property. He held a thick black leather folio firmly in his right hand. "Sir, I must insist on your immediate attention," the manager declared, his voice devoid of any previous courtesy. "We have encountered a critical issue regarding the final settlement for tonight's event." Richard blinked, struggling to pull his gaze away from the fleeing guests. He waved a trembling hand in the air, trying to project a microscopic fraction of his former arrogance. "Just run the corporate platinum card on file. Run it, and leave me alone." "We have already attempted to do so, sir," the manager replied sharply, his tone dropping to a severe, unforgiving pitch. The transaction was declined. "We then attempted to authorize your secondary personal accounts. They have also been completely restricted." Richard's mouth fell open. "What are you talking about?" "That is impossible. I have millions in those corporate accounts. Run it again. The financial sector operates with ruthless lightning-fast efficiency. When the chief strategic advisor of the city publicly announces the veto of a multi-billion-dollar municipal contract due to severe structural fraud, the banks do not wait for the morning news. Automated risk assessment algorithms trigger instantly. Credit lines are slashed. Corporate accounts linked to fraudulent bids are immediately frozen to prevent the rapid hemorrhaging of assets. My father had built his entire empire on leveraged debt, moving imaginary money around to fund his lavish lifestyle. Now the music had stopped and he had no chair to sit on. "Your banking institution has placed a hard freeze on all affiliated assets," the manager stated, opening the black leather folio and presenting a staggeringly long, itemized receipt. The total balance for the Diamond Ballroom rental, the premium, catering, the imported floral arrangements, and the top-tier open bar amounts to over $180,000. Since your credit lines are no longer active, the hotel requires an alternative immediate form of payment before you are permitted to leave these premises. Patricia let out a high, thin wail of pure despair from her spot on the floor. Brittany, still curled in a heap of rhinestones, began to sob violently, her hands tearing at her perfectly styled hair. Richard stared at the six-figure hotel bill resting in the manager's hands. His chest heaved erratically. He looked at his weeping wife, his hysterical golden child, and the towering, inescapable mountain of debt crashing down upon them. They were completely trapped in their rented palace, surrounded by the rotting, expensive debris of their own monumental hubris, facing a level of public and financial humiliation from which they would never ever recover. I did not waste another single second watching the agonizing, highly public collapse of the empire my father had built entirely on deceit. I turned my back on the pathetic, hysterical sobbing echoing from the center of the Diamond Ballroom. I reached down and effortlessly lifted Lily into my arms. She rested her head comfortably against my shoulder, entirely safe and beautifully oblivious to the catastrophic social execution that had just concluded. Mayor Thomas Harrison placed a warm, protective hand on my upper back, guiding us away from the toxic wreckage. Kendrick walked firmly on my other side, completing the impenetrable, powerful shield. We marched out of the grand double doors together in perfect synchronization, leaving the fraudulent patriarch and his enabling family to drown in their own monumental, inescapable debts. The crisp, cool night air hit my face the exact moment we stepped out of the stifling Ritz-Carlton lobby. The valet immediately brought my armored silver Volvo around to the front curb. Before the attendant could even reach for the heavy door handle, Kendrick stepped forward and opened the car door for me himself. He did not look at me with the fake sycophantic charm my family constantly utilized. He looked at me with absolute profound respect. He saw the brilliant strategist, the fiercely protective mother, and the resilient, unstoppable survivor. I have spent years navigating the vicious political trenches of this state, Kendrick said, his rich baritone voice filled with genuine, unfiltered awe. But I have never witnessed a masterclass in absolute strategic dominance quite like what you executed tonight. Your resilience is staggering, Lauren. It is a supreme honor to finally meet the real architect behind this city. I smiled genuinely, sliding Lily safely into her designated car seat. It is a pleasure to meet a man smart enough to recognize a sinking ship before he goes down with it, I replied smoothly. Kendrick let out a rich, authentic laugh that completely erased the lingering tension of the evening. We did not go our separate ways. Mayor Harrison insisted we celebrate the successful neutralization of a major municipal threat. We drove in a secure, quiet convoy away from the glaring lights of the downtown hotel district, navigating toward a highly exclusive, heavily guarded private restaurant tucked away in an affluent, hidden neighborhood. There were no flashy chandeliers here. There were no desperate socialites climbing over each other for a shred of validation. There was only warm ambient lighting, rich mahogany tables, and the absolute safety of total privacy. Inside the private dining room, the atmosphere was entirely different from the suffocating toxicity I had endured for 33 years. David, my brilliant lead intelligence operative, was already waiting at the table with a celebratory glass of vintage bourbon. He raised his glass to me the moment I walked in, offering a silent acknowledgement of a flawless victory. The mayor immediately took the seat right next to Lily, eagerly asking her to detail exactly what colors she used in her secret drawing for him. Kendrick sat across from me, engaging in a sharp, incredibly stimulating conversation about the future urban development plans we could now implement without the interference of corrupt contractors. I sat back in my plush leather chair, nursing a glass of sparkling water, and simply observed the incredible people surrounding me. This was my inner circle. This was the fortress of loyalty, brilliance, and integrity I had meticulously built from the ground up. They did not care about my DNA. They did not demand that I shrink myself down to make their fragile egos feel larger. They protected me, they respected my intellect, and they celebrated my sheer unapologetic power. This was my true family. The blood relatives who had spent decades trying to break my spirit were currently trapped in a hotel lobby, facing total financial ruin and permanent public disgrace. The family I had chosen was sitting right here, sharing a meal filled with genuine laughter, mutual respect, and absolute security. Later that night, as David drove my secure vehicle back toward my downtown penthouse, I rested my head against the cool leather of the back seat. Lily was fast asleep beside me, her small hands safely tucked into mine. I looked out the tinted passenger window at the blurring city lights. The sprawling metropolis outside belonged to the bold, the strategic, and the unyielding. I did not turn my head to look back in the direction of the Ritz-Carlton. I did not spare a single fleeting thought for the devastated, ruined family I had left behind in the ashes of their own greed. They were nothing more than a closed chapter, a finalized audit, a permanently terminated contract. I watched the reflection of my own face in the dark glass. I was not the terrified, rejected daughter anymore. I let a slow, radiant smile spread across my face. It was the breathtaking, triumphant smile of a woman who had single-handedly reclaimed her ultimate power, secured her daughter's future, and won absolute, undeniable freedom for the rest of her life. The story of Lauren serves as a powerful testament to the fact that our worth is never defined by the toxic narratives projected onto us by those who refuse to see our true potential. For years, her biological family weaponized her status as a single mother, painting her as a failure simply to elevate their own superficial egos and cover up their deep insecurities. However, the profound lesson here is that sharing DNA does not obligate anyone to endure emotional abuse, nor does it dictate a person's life trajectory. When surrounded by narcissistic individuals who prioritize public image, wealth, and social climbing over genuine connection, the healthiest response is not to argue or beg for their validation. Instead, the ultimate victory lies in walking away and building your own empire in absolute silence. Lauren did not need to shout her success from the rooftops or seek their approval. Her undeniable competence, fierce grace, and ironclad boundaries spoke volumes when the time was right. She demonstrated that true power is quiet, calculated, and grounded in authentic self-respect. Furthermore, this narrative beautifully illustrates the concept of the chosen family. We cannot control the family we are born into, but we have absolute authority over who we invite into our inner circle. By severing ties with her manipulative parents and cruel sister Lauren, made room for people who genuinely valued her intellect, protected her daughter, and celebrated her strength without any hidden conditions. Ultimately, the story teaches us that the best revenge is never about destroying others, but simply becoming so successful, so secure, and so fiercely independent that the opinions of those who once belittled you no longer matter at all. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own beautiful reality, share your journey in the comments below and subscribe to join our community of survivors.